Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Jim, I'll wave you through as we go. Let me begin by saying that Phil Berail had no idea. None. The town of Woodchopper, Alaska was a long way from Ladd Field, and Ladd Field itself was just far away from absolutely everything. It was a long way from everything that is except for mind-numbing cold. They called themselves the Cold Nose Boys. It was their job to strap in and see just how the kinds of planes that the Allied forces were going to use to win air superiority, how they would behave in the kind of cold that gives people nicknames like the Cold Nose Boys and their plane, which they dubbed the Iceberg Inez. The day, December 21st, 1943, First Lieutenant Leon Crane would co-pilot a B-24 Liberator, this Iceberg Inez. Planes like the B-24 were necessary for the war effort up there in the frozen north. Ladd itself supplied the aircraft for the so-called Forgotten Thousand-Mile War, which is the Japanese and the Americans and the Allied forces over the Aleutian Islands, and for planes that were destined to fly across Siberia en route to the Soviets as part of a Lend-Lease program. Now, it's not like it is in Alaska, but we're here in Wisconsin. I don't need to tell you that extreme cold wreaks havoc on everything: animal, mineral, spiritual, existential, mechanics for sure. They asked me from Atlanta when we had our polar vortex, Brett, what did it feel like when the wind chill was negative 43 degrees? And I said, I'll tell you what it feels like. It feels like I should never left California. It was the Cold Nose Boys' job to find out what to expect when you're expecting, so to speak. And today, First Lieutenant Leon Crane was running late. He was West Philadelphia, born and raised. Boy Scouting is where he spent most of his days. Leon Crane had made his peace at this point with the frozen north. It's much to be preferred, he would say, than getting shot at. He was an officer, and even a low-ranking one. It did have its perks. The enlisted men and women slept in these slapdash-together barracks that were nicknamed Pneumonia Gulch. And the officers were given the best of what they had when it came to parkas and the like. Crane was one of the fortunate few, and sometime before our story today, the quartermaster had handed him one of the brand new down-filled parkas that were made in partnership between the U.S. military and some guy named Eddie Bauer. But here we are on December 21st, and he's running late. He overslept a late-night poker game, also one of the things he liked about Ladd. So he grabbed his parka, he threw on his socks and boots, he stuffed his mittens in his pocket, he ran out the door. The base exchange there at Ladd was like a one-stop shop for everything, and Crane himself didn't smoke, but his pilot usually stoked a pipe from the cockpit. Crane believed it was his job to help take care of the pilot, help take care of the crew, help take care as they went about into these skies and put the old Iceberg Inez through her paces once again. So even though he was running late, Crane made a quick stop. He ran in and comes out only after a single purchase, 2 boxes of matches, 40 sticks in total. On his way to the hangar, he shoved them in his zip-up pocket, and then he arrived. Pre-check and takeoff were uneventful, just how they liked it. Radio contact was steady throughout, reporting the position every little while until they reached about the 60-mile radius of the radio's reach. It was about time to turn back, but the weather provided an opening. A column of sky reached up high enough and clear enough to give this engine failure test a go. They reached 15,000 feet above. There they tested an engine. I'm having an English failure. I'm talking about an engine failure. First at 15,000, then try to do the same at 20, and then 25. The plan was this plane had 4 engines. They would test shutting one of them down and then figure out the aerodynamic and positioning of the props and the flaps. I guess it's called feathering. Now, I'm not hip enough to aeronautical or engineering lingo to tell you what happened and why, except to say that whatever failed up there on the way to 25,000 feet failed so spectacularly that there was no point of return. They would not be able to save this mission or this plane. They would not be able to pull out of their dive. So the bomber bay doors opened, and Crane, like the rest of his crew, jumped. As he floated down earthward, Crane watched as the iceberg Inez crashed and transformed into a fireball of such considerable proportions. Good, he thought, when it came to search and rescue, but bad for the immediate, though, because along with the fuel went up in a fireball of every possible supply. When Crane landed, he found himself a decent way away from the wreck, and he was alone. And all the while, Phil Berail had no idea. No idea about the crash, or Crane, or the next 81 days, and certainly not about the role he would play. It was still plenty early in the day when Crane took stock of his situation. Nothing was broken. He seemed to be intact, at least physically. The crash was not survivable. Gone were his crew, his friends, totally alone. He took stock of his surroundings, and that snapped him back around to the immediate life and death situation he found himself at hand. There would be time for morning, but the 4 hours of available sunlight were now ebbing away. Nightfall could be deadly, dropping temperatures, wind chill, predators, no shelter. Leon Crane crashed into the Arctic with only what he had on him when he jumped. And here, the story shifts some. It shifts as he floats back to solid ground. Whatever it is that went wrong up until this point moves in the story to what tends now to go right. So much of the story, friends, is about what goes right, even in the midst of this tragedy. From here on in, as tragic as Crane's story begins, the story ends with his survival and his rescue. From touchdown to being flown back to Ladd, 81 days. 81 days. And during that time, Crane's survival becomes a story of about 100 different things and 1,000 different people and moments some time ago that made all the difference right here and right now for Crane. And I'll give you an example. Growing up in West Philadelphia, he was an Eagle Scout. Be prepared. You know the slogan most famously. Preparation was never going anywhere without his pocket knife. It was like serving alongside his comrades at Ladd. He chose, on a whim, really, to stop for matches so that he might light the pipe of his pilot and be a good teammate and a friend united by a common cause. They stayed in his pocket even after the crash. And even in faraway places like Washington, D.C., where Crane was simply a number and a need, but somewhere along the way, someone decided that it was time to provide those serving in the frigid places a parka like the one he grabbed as he was flying out the door. Crane was the only one on the plane to wear his parka. It was maybe dumb luck, maybe somewhere, sometime, he learned a lesson, and so he grabbed it as he ran out on second nature. Crane had a pocket knife. He had 40 matches. And then he discovered a letter from Dad that he'd also stuffed in his jacket pocket some time ago. Love from home, it read. That letter stuffed in his jacket, that would be what the shavings and the kindling that his knife provided, that's what the matches would need in order for the flame to catch. In order for him to stop from dying. All the while, with now a fire and little else, somewhere in a frontier town called Woodchopper, there's a man named Phil Berail who continues to have no idea. No idea that how his life would come together to save another. Hunters and trappers of the area knew the Charlie River. This is where our story takes place. This is where Leon, Crane, and Berail's story come together. By the time Crane crashed, Berail was in his 60s, and he had long given up trapping. About 4 years ago, 4 years ago was the last time he stepped foot in his cabin. But it was well made, and it was sturdy, and it was well stocked. Because God forbid anybody would ever be in a bad way out there. Berail believed in the custom of the community that if you have a cabin, leave it open, leave it available, leave it well stocked for anyone in need. Crane from West Philadelphia didn't know any of that. He didn't know about trappers, about Phil, about his cabin, and Phil's commitment to leave it open and stocked in case someone, somewhere out there would need it. He had no idea, but he soon found out. After a week of shivering and frostbitten, Crane decides that rescue is not coming. Crane knows now he has to walk himself out. At the next sunrise, he gathers up his parachute. He chooses to go this way and not that. Along the river, he learns his name is Charlie. He walks till about 3 p.m. It's time to make camp. Somewhere among the woods in the dusk of this river valley, Crane thinks he sees a tent. He thinks he sees a tent up on some kind of platform. Snow blindness, he thinks. It's the mind's mischief, some sort of Arctic oasis probably, but he yells out anyway, "Hello!" He doesn't wait for an answer. He runs forward to his mirage, only to find that it's getting bigger and bigger the closer he gets. It was a cabin. It was Phil Berail's cabin. And all the while, Phil had no idea. Phil Berail saves Leon Crane's life simply by living the way Phil chose to live. He followed customs, those of his community. He valued what the cabin and the supplies had done for him in his younger days and what it might do again. The story goes that Crane tumbles into the cabin. He can't believe what he finds. Over the span of a few days, he finds himself now with a different kind of rescue. Shelter and warmth and food and even something to read. This is the list of what's in the cabin. Crane is shocked to find that he's lost his mittens. He took them off in order to clasp his parachute together as the plane was going down. His hands were in bad shape, totally frostbitten and cut. But Phil had left behind mittens, and even better than that, moose hide mittens, perfect for the weather. Crane had been chewing on moss all week. He made a bow and arrow. It wasn't working. Phil had left behind hot chocolate and sugar and raisins and dried beef and a stove and firewood and pots and pans too. Crane had no idea where he was. But Phil Berail had left behind a map. As Crane recovered in Phil's cabin, he came across boxes, all addressed to the same person, Phil Berail, Woodchopper, Alaska. He thought that was his job. Crane thought that Alaska was so remote that all you had to do was put the name and what you did and where you were, and it would get to where it goes. Phil had no idea, but now Leon Crane did. And now he knew the name of the one who saved his life. Leon would spend the bulk of his 81 days alone, below zero, there in the warmth and the shelter of Phil's cabin. And he thought simply about riding out the winter and making attempts after the thaw, but Crane now thought about his friends and his father and the people back at Ladd whose stomachs had churned at the mystery of what had happened and the pain shared among comrades and brothers when there are no survivors. Long story short, thanks to Phil Berail, Crane gathered his supplies and he put on Phil's mittens and he put on Phil's clothes under his army parka and he slipped the pocket knife into his pocket and he took the map that Phil had left behind and he hiked. You can see the route on your bulletin cover. He hikes for days and days and days Finally arriving at a cabin he would learn belonged to the Ames family. The children thought it was some kind of boogeyman Bigfoot emerging out of the winter woods. But it was Leon Crane. Here's his picture. The story goes that the Ames family takes Crane to Woodchopper via dog sled. From Woodchopper, Crane contacts Lad Base. He reports in as if like Lazarus reporting for duty. Crane always had thought, as I mentioned, that the boxes belonged to a woodchopper named Phil in Alaska. He had no idea that that's where he lived, but there he was. And they met. And the crazy part about the story is, part of me, the Hollywood part of me, wants a big ending. It doesn't happen. It is wholly uneventful. Crane steadily makes his way, trying to express his gratitude and his thanksgiving to Phil, and Phil simply remarks, "Well, I'm glad it could be useful." That's why he left it there, after all, to be useful, to be open and stocked. Our parable, the farmer spreads the seed with prospects for the future. He takes action now, so that sometime soon he can reap what is sown. The parable makes the point that he knows not when or even how the seed he sows becomes the crops he reaps, but the farmer seeds the field anyways. Confirmation, new members, you and me, all of us, we could say the same. Do we exactly know how and when what we do will come to harvest? Do we know precisely when the choices that we have made and the values we live by will grow? Phil Berail didn't. He couldn't. He had no idea, but the proverbial grain grew anyways. And when he met Leon Crane, he knew that in some way the moment of harvest has come. By how we live our life, we can touch the lives of others even if we have no idea. If someone hears your voice speaking out, even if you do not know they're there, they still hear it. If they see your action, even if we have no idea, it is still observed. How you live your life, how you plant the seed, means that harvest can come. And even though Phil Berail had no idea, the moment he left that door open, so to speak, he reaped as this man named Leon walks in the door. Amen. Friends, let us stand and